They found a locked chest in an abandoned cabin. What was inside ended a 31-year mystery. The rot was the first thing to hit them, a thick sweet sour smell that clung to the back of the throat. It was the smell of time itself, digesting wood, cloth, and forgotten things. Liam, his face pale in the sliver of light from his headlamp, pushed the cabin door wider. It groaned, a low guttural sound of protest from hinges fused with rust. Inside, the darkness was a physical presence, heavy and cold. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, danced like frantic ghosts in the beam of his light. "God, Maya, you smell that?" he whispered, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Maya stepped past him. Her movements measured, her expression unreadable. She was 10 years older than him, a veteran of these urban explorations, and she moved with a quiet reverence. "For the dead places of the world, it's the smell of a story ending," she murmured, her own light cutting a sharp, clean path through the gloom. "Let's see what kind it was." The cabin was small, a single room that served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space. A Castilian stove, its belly bloated with rust, stood cold in one corner. A skeletal chair lay on its side, as if kicked over in a final, desperate act. In the center of the floor, a tattered rug was a landscape of mildew and mouse droppings, but it was the far wall that drew their eyes. A simple wooden bed frame, stripped of its mattress, was pushed against the damp-stained planks, and beneath it, tucked deep into the shadows, was a chest. It wasn't large, but it was solid, made of dark, heavy wood and bound with iron straps the color of dried blood. A thick, ornate lock, a monstrosity of brass and iron, held it shut. It didn't belong here. Everything else in the cabin was decaying, surrendering to the slow, relentless siege of nature. The chest, however, seemed to be actively resisting it. It was a defiant presence, a sealed secret in a room of open wounds. "Well, hello," Liam breathed, his earlier apprehension giving way to the familiar thrill of discovery. He knelt, reaching a hand out to touch its surface. The wood was cold, almost unnaturally so. This is something else." Maya crouched beside him, running her fingers over the intricate metalwork of the lock. "No keyhole," she said, her voice tight. "It's a combination lock, an old one." She pointed her light at the face of the lock. 4 brass dials, each etched with numbers, were frozen in place by grime and time. For the next hour, they worked. They were a well-practiced team. Liam, with his boundless energy and a toolkit full of pry bars and hammers. Maya, with her patience, her delicate touch, and an almost supernatural understanding of how things came apart. He tried to force it to smash the lock, but the iron held firm, the sound of his hammer blows shockingly loud in the stillness. Each strike felt like a violation. Maya stopped him. "Wait," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "Brute force isn't the answer. It never is." She took over, using a set of fine-tooled picks and a small vial of oil. She worked with the intense focus of a surgeon, her headlamp a bright halo around her face. She cleaned the dials, her breath misting in the cold air. She turned them, listening for the faint, almost imperceptible click of the tumblers falling into place. The cabin seemed to hold its breath with her. The only sounds were the drip-drip-drip of water somewhere in the walls and the soft, metallic whisper of the dials turning. 1 click, dot 2 dot 3 dot on the 4th, a deep, resonant thunk echoed from within the chest. It was a sound of finality, of surrender. The lock sprang open. Liam let out a whoop of triumph, but Maya remained silent, her face a mask of concentration. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not excitement, but a deep, unsettling caution. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Together, they lifted the heavy lid. The smell that rose from the chest was not the damp rot of the cabin, but something else entirely. It was the faint, clean scent of cedar, and beneath it, the smell of old paper and dried lavender. The contents were neatly arranged, wrapped in yellowed linen. It wasn't gold or antique weapons. It was a life, a child's life, preserved. In a dark wood tomb, on top, lay a small hand-knitted sweater, sky blue, with a single pearl button at the collar. Next to it was a pair of tiny leather shoes, scuffed at the toes, one of the laces broken. Liam lifted one of the shoes. It was impossibly small, light as a feather. He could feel the phantom weight of the small foot that had once filled it, and a cold dread began to seep into his bones. Beneath the clothes was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded pink ribbon. And under those, a small hand-carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. Its painted eyes seemed to stare up at them, full of a silent, unanswerable question. Maya, her hands trembling slightly, picked up a small leather-bound photo album. She opened it. The first page held a single black-and-white photograph, a little girl with bright, curious eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the world. She had a gap between her two front teeth and a spray of freckles across her nose. She was wearing the same blue sweater that lay in the chest. "Oh, God," Liam whispered, the sound catching in his throat. This wasn't a treasure hunt anymore. This was a desecration. They were intruders in a sanctuary of grief. Maya turned the page. More photos. The girl on a swing, her legs kicked high into the air. The girl holding a kitten, her face buried in its fur. The girl standing between a man and a woman, her parents, their faces beaming with a love so fierce it was almost painful to look at. Then, Maya's breath hitched. She pointed a shaking finger at the last photo in the album. It was a picture of the girl, standing in front of what looked like a town hall. She was holding a blue ribbon, a prize from some local fair. And standing behind her, one hand resting possessively on her shoulder, was a man in a sheriff's uniform. He was smiling, a wide, paternal smile for the camera. But there was something in his eyes, a glint of something cold and proprietary, that made the blood run cold. "I know him," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know that face." She looked from the photograph to Liam, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Liam, that's Sheriff Thompson. From the news. From the documentaries." The name hit Liam like a physical blow. Sheriff Thomas Thompson, the hero cop. The man who had led the biggest manhunt in the state's history for a missing 60-year-old girl named Lily Little Sparrow Anderson, who had vanished without a trace from that very same town fair 31 years ago. The case that had broken the nation's heart. The case that was never solved. A wave of nausea washed over Liam. He felt dizzy, the small, dark cabin suddenly closing in on him. He stumbled back, away from the chest, away from the ghost of the little girl whose life was packed so neatly inside it. His foot caught on the edge of the mildewed rug, and he fell, his hand landing hard on the floorboards beside the bed. The board gave way with a crack. It wasn't rotten, it felt loose. His heart pounding, he pushed himself up and pulled at the board. It came away easily. Beneath it was a small hollowed-out space, and inside that space, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, was a small tin box, the kind that held cookies or tea. With trembling hands, Maya reached into the hole and lifted it out. It was light. She opened the lid. Inside, there was no treasure, no gold, no jewels. There was only a single object, a cassette tape. On its white label, written in the shaky, uncertain script of a child, were two words, "He saw," and beneath those words, a name, Samuel. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy, charged with the weight of a 31-year-old secret. The drip of water in the walls sounded like a ticking clock. Who was Samuel? What did he see? The questions hung in the air, potent and terrifying. They had come looking for adventure, for a story to tell their friends. But the story they had found was not one of adventure. It was one of unimaginable darkness. They had stumbled out of the present and into the final, horrifying moments of a little girl's life. And as they stared at the tape, they both knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that the story wasn't over. They had just become a part of it. The chest hadn't just been opened. A tomb had been unsealed. And the ghost that had just been released would not rest until it had its say. The silence of the cabin was no longer empty. It was screaming. 31 years earlier, that same silence had a different quality. It was the silence of a summer afternoon, thick with the buzz of bees and the lazy drone of a distant tractor. It was the silence Lily Anderson loved most. At 6 years old, she was a creature of the woods, more comfortable with the rustle of leaves than the chatter of the schoolyard. Her world was the creek behind her house, the towering pines that stood like ancient sentinels, and the secret sun-dappled clearings where she would sit for hours, carving her little birds. Her father David had taught her how to carve. He was a carpenter, a man whose hands were calloused and strong, but who could coax the most delicate shapes from a block of wood. He saw the same quiet patience in his daughter. "You have the touch, Lilybug," he'd say, his voice a low rumble of pride as he watched her small fingers guide the tiny knife. "You see the bird inside the wood before you even start." Lily's birds were her companions. Each one had a name, a personality. There was Pip, the brave one, Willow, the shy one, and Sky, the dreamer. She kept them lined up on her windowsill, a silent wooden flock ready to take flight. Her mother, Sarah, would watch her, a knot of love and fear tightening in her chest. Sarah was a warrior. She saw dangers everywhere, the deep water of the creek, the poison ivy lurking in the undergrowth, the strangers who sometimes passed through their small town of Harmony Creek. "Don't wander too far. My little sparrow," she would call out, her voice thin with anxiety. It was her pet name for Lily, born from the way the child would flit from one discovery to the next, her small, bird-like frame full of a restless energy. Lily would just smile, that gap-toothed sun-bright smile, and hold up a newly finished bird. "I'm safe, Mummy. The trees protect me." And for 6 years, they did. The antagonist in this idyll was a man everyone else saw as its protector. Sheriff Thomas Thompson was more than a lawman in Harmony Creek. He was an institution. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that could charm. A snake in eyes the color of a winter sky, he cultivated an image of unimpeachable authority and fatherly concern. He had a wife who taught Sunday school, and 2 sons who were stars on the high school football team. He was the man you called when your cat was stuck in a tree. The man who organized the town's 4th of July picnic. The man whose presence made everyone feel safe. But behind the locked door of his own mind, Thompson was a different man. He was a collector, not of stamps or coins, but of secrets. He knew who was cheating on his wife, who was skimming from the till at the general store, who was drinking too much on a Saturday night. He held these secrets like currency, using them to build a network of obligation and fear that cemented his power. He was a puppeteer, and the town of Harmony Creek was his stage. His greatest secret, the one he kept locked in the deepest, darkest vault of his soul, was a hunger. A cold, predatory hunger that stirred when he saw innocence, when he saw the untainted, trusting light in a child's eyes. It was a sickness he had learned to manage, to control, to hide behind the gleaming badge and the easy smile. But sometimes, the hunger grew too strong to ignore. He had noticed Lily Anderson. He saw her at the town library, her small face buried in a book of fairy tales. He saw her at the market, her hand tucked safely in her mother's. He saw her a handful of times, and each time, the hunger grew sharper. She was perfect, so bright, so trusting. A little sparrow, the name made him smile. Sparrows were so easy to catch. The hidden witness was a boy named Samuel Black. At 10 years old, Samuel lived in a world of shadows. He was a quiet, observant boy with large dark eyes that seemed to see everything. He was an outcast, too shy for the rough-and-tumble games of the other boys, too lost in his own thoughts for the girls. His only real friend was Lily. He didn't flit through the woods like she did. He would sit, still as a stone, watching the world from the periphery. He knew where the fox had its den, where the owls nested, where the rarest wildflowers grew. He and Lily shared a silent language, a bond forged in their mutual love for the quiet places. He would watch, mesmerized, as she carved her birds, and she would listen, her head cocked to one side, as he told her the secret names of the trees. Samuel's father had died in a logging accident 2 years prior, and his mother had retreated into a shell of grief, leaving Samuel to navigate the world largely on his own. He was a ghost in his own home, a silent observer of his mother's sorrow. This isolation had sharpened his senses. made him preternaturally aware of the subtle currents of emotion. The things left unsaid, the darkness that could hide behind a friendly face. He did not like Sheriff Thompson. The other kids saw a hero. A man who gave them candy and let them sit in his patrol car. Samuel saw the flicker of ice in the sheriff's eyes when he thought no one was looking. He saw the way his smile never quite reached them. He saw the way the sheriff's hand would linger just a second too long on a child's shoulder. Samuel had no words for the unease he felt, but it was a cold, hard knot in the pit of his stomach whenever the man was near. The day of the Harmony Creek Annual Fair was bright and hot. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. The sounds of laughter and carnival music filled the town square. Lily was ecstatic. She had entered one of her best carvings, a tiny, perfect bluebird. In the children's craft competition, "Do you think I'll win, Samuel?" she asked, her eyes shining with excitement as they stood near the judging table. "Of course you will," Samuel said, his loyalty absolute. "It's the best one." And she did. The judge, a kindly old woman with flour on her apron, pinned a blue ribbon to Lily's blue sweater. Lily beamed, her smile a supernova of pure joy. Her parents hugged her, their faces glowing with pride. It was then that Sheriff Thompson appeared, materializing out of the crowd as if summoned. "Well now, look at our little champion," he boomed, his voice full of warmth. He knelt down to Lily's level. "That's a mighty fine bird, little sparrow. You've got a real gift." Sarah, Lily's mother, preened. "Thank you, Sheriff. We're so proud of her." "As you should be," Thompson said, his eyes fixed on Lily. He reached out and straightened her ribbon. His fingers brushed against her shoulder. "You know, I know a place in the woods, not far from here, where the real bluebirds make their nests. The most beautiful blue you've ever seen. I bet a little bird expert like you would love to see them." Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? Can we go, Daddy? Can we?" David laughed. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. We've got a whole fair to enjoy today." Of course," Thompson said, standing up. He gave David a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Just an idea. You enjoy your day, folks. Congratulations again, Lily." He gave her a wink, a special, conspiratorial wink, and then he was gone. Swallowed back up by the crowd, Samuel had watched the entire exchange from a few feet away, half hidden behind a cotton candy stand. He had seen the look in the sheriff's eyes when he spoke to Lily. It wasn't friendly. It was the same look he'd seen on the face of the fox just before it snatched a field mouse. A look of intense, focused hunger. The cold knot in his stomach tightened into a fist of pure dread. Later that afternoon, the conflict began its brutal, inexorable escalation. The fair was a swirling kaleidoscope of color and sound. David and Sarah, wanting to ride the Ferris wheel, left Lily with Samuel by the duck pond game. "We'll be right back, sweetie," Sarah said, kissing the top of Lily's head. "Stay with Samuel. Don't wander off." "I won't," Lily promised. For a few minutes, they were happy. They threw rings at floating ducks, their laughter echoing over the water. But then Lily saw it. A flash of brilliant blue in the trees at the edge of the town square, where the woods began. A bluebird. "Samuel, look," she whispered, her eyes wide. "It's one of them." She was gone before he could stop her. Not running, but flitting, just like her mother said. She slipped through the crowd. A small figure in a blue sweater, drawn by the promise of magic. Samuel panicked, pushed his way after her. He caught up to her at the tree line. The noise of the fair faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of the forest. Lily was standing perfectly still, staring into the woods. A few yards ahead, on the path, stood Sheriff Thompson. He wasn't in his uniform anymore. He was wearing simple trousers and a dark shirt. "There you are," the sheriff said, his voice soft and inviting. "I was hoping I'd see you again. The bluebirds are just a little ways down this path. It's a secret path you want to see." Lily looked back at Samuel, her expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Samuel wanted to scream. He wanted to run out and grab her hand and pull her back to the light and noise of the fair. But he was frozen. The sheriff's eyes met his over Lily's head. There was no smile now, just a flat, cold command. Stay where you are. Say nothing. It was a look that stripped the air from Samuel's lungs. It was a look that promised consequences he couldn't begin to imagine. He was 10 years old, and in that moment, he felt the crushing weight of an adult evil he had no power to fight. Lily, oblivious to the silent, terrifying exchange, made her decision. She trusted the sheriff. Everyone did. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. "Okay," she said, her voice small. "That's my girl," Thompson said. He held out his hand. "Come on, it's our little secret." Lily looked back at Samuel one last time, a bright, hopeful smile on her face. Then she turned, took the sheriff's hand, and walked with him into the woods. The trees swallowed them whole. Samuel stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He felt a tear slide down his cheek, hot and shameful. He had done nothing. He had let her go. The silence she had loved so much had just become his prison. He could hear the cheerful music of the Ferris wheel in the distance, a mocking soundtrack to the moment his childhood, and Lily's life, had ended. The search for Lily Anderson began as a frantic, disorganized panic, and then coalesced into a grim, methodical operation orchestrated by the very man who had made it necessary. Sheriff Thompson was a master of performance. He transformed the Harmony Creek Community Center into an investigation headquarters, its walls plastered with maps and photos of Lily's smiling, gap-toothed face. He was the calm center of the storm, his voice a steady, reassuring baritone. In a sea of rising hysteria, he directed search parties, his finger tracing confident lines across topographical maps. He comforted David and Sarah, his arm around their shoulders, his expression a perfect mask of empathetic grief. "We'll find her," he promised them, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, on my life, we will bring your little girl home." Sarah clung to his words, to him, as if he were a life raft. David, his face a grey mask of shock, just nodded, his eyes hollow. He couldn't reconcile the vibrant, living presence of his daughter with the gaping void she had left behind. Samuel watched it all from the edges, a ghost haunting his own life. The fear from that moment at the tree line had taken root inside him, a cold, cancerous growth. It kept him silent. He would open his mouth to tell his mother what he saw, but the words would die in his throat, choked by the image of Thompson's flat, murderous eyes. How could he explain it? The sheriff looked at me funny. They would think he was a confused, grieving child. Worse, they would tell the sheriff. And Samuel knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that if the sheriff knew he was a witness, something terrible would happen to him. Thompson, with chilling precision, began to manipulate the investigation. He knew he had to create a diversion, a plausible narrative to feed the hungry maw of public speculation and media attention. He found his scapegoat in a man named Jacob Miller, a quiet, reclusive handyman who lived in a small shack on the outskirts of town. Miller was an outsider, socially awkward, and an easy target. Thompson brought him in for questioning. The interrogation was a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. It took place, not in a formal room, but in the sheriff's own office. The walls covered in commendations and photos of his smiling family. "Jacob," Thompson began, his voice deceptively gentle as he circled the terrified man. "People saw you at the fair. They said you were watching the children. I like the music," Miller stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "I was just listening." "Just listening," Thompson repeated, his voice hardening. "Or were you watching? Were you watching the little girls, Jacob? Were you watching Lily Anderson?" He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "She was a beautiful little girl, wasn't she? So full of life." The questioning went on for hours. Thompson twisted Miller's words, his loneliness, his social awkwardness, into something sinister. He leaked details of the interrogation to a local reporter he had on his payroll, painting a picture of a disturbed loner with an unhealthy interest in children. The town, desperate for an answer, for a monster to blame, seized on it. Jacob Miller's name became a curse. His shack was vandalized. He was fired from his job. People would cross the street to avoid him. Thompson had successfully redirected the town's fear and anger onto an innocent man, creating a smokescreen so thick no one could see the truth behind it. Meanwhile, the betrayal of Lily's parents deepened. Thompson became their shadow, their confidant. He would bring them food, sit with them for hours, sharing his theories about the case. He fed them a steady diet of false hope and misdirection. "We found a piece of blue cloth down by the river," he told them one evening, his face graved. "We're having it tested. It could be a strong lead." He knew perfectly well the cloth was from a discarded picnic blanket. Another time, he said, "We got a tip about a transient who was seen in the area. A man with a scar on his face. We're putting out an APB. He had invented the manhole cloth." David and Sarah, drowning in their grief, clung to these fabricated threads. Their trust in the sheriff was absolute. He was their hero, their only hope. The irony was a blade twisting in Thompson's gut. But it was a pain he welcomed. It was part of the thrill, the exquisite dance of control and deception. He was the author of their agony and their savior, all at once. The conflict for Samuel was a silent, internal war. Every time he saw a missing poster with Lily's face on it, a wave of guilt and nausea would wash over him. He started having nightmares. He would see Lily's smiling face turning to look at him, her mouth opening to ask, "Why didn't you help me, Samuel? Why did you let him take me?" He would wake up screaming, his sheets soaked with sweat. His mother, lost in her own world of grief, saw only a troubled boy. She took him to the town doctor, who prescribed him sedatives. The drugs dulled the edges of his terror, but did nothing to erase the memory. He felt like he was living behind a pane of glass, watching the world go on, unable to connect, unable to speak his truth. One afternoon, he saw David, Lily's father, sitting on a bench in the town square, staring at the empty bandstand where Lily had received her prize. David looked like a hollowed-out version of the man he once was. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with lines of sleepless, unending pain. A surge of desperate courage rose in Samuel. He had to try. He had to do something. He walked over to the bench and sat down, his small body rigid with fear. "Mr. Anderson," he whispered. David turned slowly, his eyes unfocused. "Samuel," he said, his voice raspy. "How are you, son?" I saw Lily," Samuel began, his voice trembling. "At the fair, before she was gone." David's eyes sharpened. He leaned forward, his attention suddenly total. "What did you see, Samuel? Did you see who she was with?" Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. This was it. This was his chance. He opened his mouth to say the name that was burned into his brain. Thompson. Well, what have we here?" The voice, deep and friendly, came from behind them. Samuel froze. It was Sheriff Thompson. He was standing there, a benevolent smile on his face, his shadow falling over them both. "Just checking on you, David," the sheriff said. His eyes, however, fixed on Samuel. It was the same look from the woods, a look of cold, absolute possession. It was a warning, a threat. "I know what you're thinking. Don't you dare." "Samuel here was just about to tell me something," David said, his voice urgent, about what he saw. Thompson's smile widened, but it was a terrifying, predatory thing. He placed a heavy hand on Samuel's shoulder. The weight of it was immense, a physical manifestation of his power. "Is that so, son?" he said, his voice smooth as silk. "What did you see? Did you see that drifter I was telling you about? The one with the scar?" Samuel looked from David's desperate, hopeful face to Thompson's cold, warning eyes. The courage he had mustered evaporated, leaving only the familiar icy residue of fear. He couldn't do it. The sheriff was a god in this town. Who would believe a 10-year-old boy over him? The consequences were unthinkable. He dropped his gaze to the ground. I don't remember," he mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I thought I saw something, but I was wrong. The disappointment that washed over David's face was a physical blow. He slumped back against the bench, the brief flicker of hope extinguished. "Oh," he said quietly. "Okay, son. It's okay." Thompson squeezed Samuel's shoulder, a gesture that was both a paternal comfort and a vicious threat. "He's a good boy," the sheriff said to David. "Just confused, like the rest of us." He then leaned down, his mouth close to Samuel's ear, his voice a barely audible hiss. "You're a smart kid, Samuel. Let's keep it that way." He straightened up, his public smile back in place. "I'll let you to be," he said, and with a final nod, he walked away. Whistling a cheerful tune, Samuel sat there, paralyzed, the feeling of the sheriff's hand still burning on his shoulder. He had failed. He had failed. Lily, he had failed. Her father, he had looked into the face of evil, and blinked. And in that moment of surrender, Samuel Black understood that some secrets were not meant to be kept. They were prisons. And he had just been locked inside for life. 31 years is a long time to hold your breath. For Liam and Maya, crouched in the suffocating stillness of the cabin, that suffocating weight pressed down on them. The cassette tape felt impossibly heavy in Maya's hand, a relic from a dead format holding a truth that refused to die. The name Samuel was a ghost in the room, a question that demanded an answer. They had to know what was on that tape. Left the cabin as they found it, but for the chest, which they carried between them, like a coffin. The hike back to their car was silent, the weight of their discovery far heavier than the physical burden of the chest. The world outside the cabin seemed garish and loud, ignorant of the profound horror they had unearthed. Back in the city, the first stop was an old electronics repair shop run by a man with a magnifying glass permanently attached to his forehead. He looked at the cassette tape as if it were a fossil. "Haven't seen one of these in a dog's age," he grumbled, but he found an old player in the back, cleaned the heads, and with a click and a whir, the sound of the past began to bleed into the present. It wasn't a confession. It was the voice of a child, whispering, as if afraid of being overheard. It was Samuel. The tape was a diary, recorded in secret in his bedroom 31 years ago. The audio was distorted, full of hiss and static, but the story was terrifyingly clear. He took her hand, the boy's voice whispered, trembling with a fear that was still palpable across the decades. "Sheriff Thompson." He told her it was a secret. He looked at me. He knew I saw. He didn't smile. His eyes were like a snake's eyes, cold. I wanted to yell, I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. He took her into the woods, and she never came back. The tape went on. It was a raw, unfiltered stream of a child's terror and guilt. He described seeing the sheriff return from the woods alone hours later, his shirt smudged with dirt. He described the nightmares, the feeling of being watched, the crushing weight of his silence. The tape ended abruptly with the sound of a door opening and a woman's voice calling his name. Liam and Maya sat in their car, the speakers hissing with silence, the child's last whispered words hanging between them. It was confirmation, a voice from the grave pointing a finger directly at the town's hero. But it was still just a child's story on a degraded tape. A good lawyer would tear it to shreds. It wasn't enough. "The chest," Maya said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with a thought. "There has to be more. Why pack her things away so carefully? Why this cabin? Why the fake bottom?" They went back to their apartment and tore the chest apart. They ripped out the linen lining, pried at the seams, tapped every inch of the wood, listening for a hollow sound, and they found it. A small section of the base was not solid. Using a knife, Maya carefully worked it loose. It wasn't a compartment. It was a single, thin slit, barely wide enough to slide a piece of paper through. And inside, protected from light and air, was a small wax paper envelope. Liam's fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were not letters, but 3 strips of undeveloped film negatives, and a single, small, tarnished brass key. The plot twist landed with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a meticulously constructed puzzle. Samuel, the terrified 10-year-old boy, had grown into a man who had planned for this day. He had created a trail of breadcrumbs for someone to follow. Finding a place to develop the negatives was another challenge. A journey into the arcane world of analog photography. They found a boutique lab, run by a young woman with purple hair, who was fascinated by the find. The wait was excruciating. They paced the small waiting room, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. Finally, she emerged from the darkroom, her face pale. She held 3 glossy prints in her hand. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice shaky, "but it feels wrong." She laid them on the counter. The images were grainy, taken from a low angle, the perspective of someone small hiding in the bushes. The first photo showed Sheriff Thompson, his back to the camera, leading Lily by the hand, down a narrow, sun-dappled path. Her face was turned slightly, a look of trusting innocence on her features. The second photo was closer. Thompson had knelt down, and he was talking to her. His face was in profile, his expression unreadable. Lily was holding up her carved blue bird, showing it to him. The third photo was the one that made Liam's stomach clench. It was taken from further away. Thompson was standing alone now. He was in a small clearing, his back to the camera. He was holding a shovel. At his feet, the ground was disturbed, a patch of dark, freshly turned earth in the middle of the sunlit woods. Lily was nowhere to be seen. It was the missing moment, the horrifying unspoken truth captured on film. "The key," Maya breathed, her eyes locked on the photograph. "The key has to be for the rest of it." The key had no markings, no numbers. It was anonymous. How could they possibly find the lock it belonged to? They spent days on the internet, cross-referencing banks, post offices, and old businesses in Harmony Creek from 30 years ago. It was a dead end. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Liam was staring at the photo of Thompson with the shovel, his mind racing. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, was a small stone marker. He zoomed in on the digital scan of the photo, enhancing it until the pixels screamed. He could just make out a few letters. "Immemorial Lib. The Harmony Creek Memorial Library," he said, his voice electric. He pulled up Old Town records. The library had been built in 1985. It had a time capsule set into its foundation, and for a small fee, residents could rent a safe deposit box in the library's secure basement archives, a service that had been discontinued 20 years ago. The library was still there, a stately brick building on the town square. Convincing the current librarian, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, to let them into the defunct archive was a battle. It took a call to a lawyer friend, who spun a convincing story about a disputed inheritance. Finally, Mrs. Gable led them down a dusty staircase into a cold, climate-controlled basement. A wall of small brass-fronted boxes gleamed in the dim light. They found the one that matched their key. Box 113. Maya inserted the key. It turned smoothly, silently. She pulled the long, narrow metal box out. It was heavier than she expected. She lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no bonds. There was a single, thick, leather-bound journal. On the first page, in neat, precise handwriting, were the words, "For Lily. May they finally know." It was Samuel's diary. Not the diary of a 10-year-old boy, but the diary of the man he became. A man haunted, broken, but fiercely determined. For 30 years, Samuel Black, living as a recluse in the woods, just outside the town that had stolen his soul, had dedicated his life to one thing: documenting the truth. The diary was a devastating testament to a life lived in the shadow of a single, horrific moment. He wrote about his decades of watching Thompson. He had become a ghost, a silent observer of the sheriff's life. He detailed how Thompson rose through the ranks, becoming a state-level hero, a celebrated public figure, all while hiding his monstrous secret. But the diary revealed something far more shocking. A full-blown conspiracy. Thompson hadn't acted alone. Samuel, through years of painstaking, obsessive observation, had uncovered a network. A small, powerful group of men in the town. A judge, a wealthy businessman, another deputy were part of a secret club, a hunting club, but they didn't hunt animals. The cabin where Liam and Maya had found the chest was their clubhouse. Lily wasn't Thompson's first victim. She was just the one who got away, in a sense, the one whose disappearance became too public to bury completely. The other victims were children from poor families. Transients, runaways, people no one would miss. Thompson was the ringleader, the one who procured the victims. The others were his accomplices, his protectors. They had helped him plant the false leads, silence potential witnesses, and bury the evidence. The respected judge had been the one to officially close the Miller investigation, clearing Thompson's path. The businessman had funded Thompson's political campaigns, ensuring his power grew. The chest was Samuel's masterwork of vengeance. He had spent years gathering the items. He had broken into Thompson's own home to steal the photo of him with Lily. He had found the clearing from that day and dug until he found the small, heartbreaking remnants of Lily's life. Her sweater, her shoes, the carved bird she had been so proud of. He had put it all together, a perfect, undeniable time bomb of truth. The final entry in the diary was dated just 2 weeks before Liam and Maya found the cabin. "I am tired," Samuel wrote. "The fear has been my only companion for so long, but I have finished my work. The chest is in the cabin. The key is with the negatives. I have built the weapon. Now, I just need a soldier to find it and pull the trigger. I don't know if I will be here to see it. The cancer is in my bones now. A fitting end for a life built on a rotten foundation. But it doesn't matter. This was never about me. It was always for her. For the little sparrow who never learned to fly. Fly now, Lily." Flyfree. Liam closed the journal. The air in the basement was thick with the weight of Samuel's lonely, heroic life. He had been the hidden witness, the silent victim, and ultimately, the architect of justice. He had forged his pain into a key, his fear into a map, and his guilt into a weapon that could not be ignored. The stakes had just shifted from a personal tragedy to a sprawling, monstrous scandal, and the trigger was now in their hands. The fuse was lit. The only question left was how to make the explosion as public and as devastating as possible. They found their answer in Melissa Corbin, a journalist whose career was built on dismantling giants. She was a shark, relentless and fearless, with a deep-seated hatred for men who abused power. When Maya and Liam laid out the contents of the chest and the safe deposit box on her office floor, Corbin's eyes, usually cynical and world-weary, widened with a predatory gleam. This wasn't just a story. This was a reckoning. "Thomas Thompson," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like a curse. "He's being honored next Saturday. The Governor's Medal of Valor for his lifetime of service to the state. The ceremony is being held in Harmony Creek's town square. It's going to be broadcast live on every local network." She looked up from the grainy photograph of Thompson with the shovel, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "The whole state will be watching. Let's give them a show." The plan was audacious, a high-wire act of digital vengeance. For 5 days, Corbin's team worked in a secured, secret location. They digitized the photographs, transcribed the most damning passages from Samuel's diary, and edited the audio from the cassette tape, cleaning it up until the 10-year-old boy's terrified whispers were crystal clear. They built a website, a simple, elegant memorial to Lily Anderson. At the top of the page was her smiling school picture. Below it, a single, stark headline: "The Truth About Harmony Creek. 31 Years of Lies." The rest of the page was a meticulously organized timeline of evidence, ready to go live with the click of a button. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn Saturday. The Harmony Creek Town Square, the very place where Lily had won her blue ribbon, was festooned with bunting and flags. A large stage had been erected in front of the Memorial Library. A crowd of hundreds had gathered, their faces full of civic pride. They were there to celebrate their hero. Thomas Thompson, now in his late 60s, his hair, a distinguished silver, looked every bit the part. He was immaculate in a dark suit, his chest puffed out, his face radiating a benevolent, grandfatherly charm. He sat on the stage next to the governor, soaking in the adoration of the crowd. He shook hands, he smiled, he waved. He was a man entirely at peace, secure in his fortress of lies. Liam and Maya were in the crowd, lost in the sea of faces, their hearts pounding in a rhythm of dread and anticipation. Corbin was in a news van parked a block away, a bank of monitors in front of her, her finger hovering over a button on her laptop. The governor stepped to the podium. His voice boomed across the square. In a world that often feels dark and uncertain, he began, "We look for heroes, men of integrity, of courage, men like Thomas Thompson." As he spoke, Corbin pressed the button. Instantly, every phone in the crowd buzzed. A news alert from Corbin's station. Breaking. Celebrated hero cop, Thomas Thompson, accused in 31-year-old murder of 6-year-old Lily Anderson. Evidence revealed. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. People glanced at their phones, their brows furrowed. A low murmur began to spread, a wave of disbelief. On stage, the governor continued, oblivious. For over 3 decades, Tom Thompson has been the bedrock of this community, a symbol of safety and justice. Corbin gave a signal to her tech operative. Now, the 2 large screens flanking the stage, which had been showing a slideshow of Thompson's career highlights, flickered and went black. Then, a new image appeared on both screens. Massive, undeniable. It was the grainy photograph of Sheriff Thompson, his back to the camera, holding a shovel in a sun-dappled clearing. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The murmur died, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. On stage, Thompson froze. His smile faltered. He stared at the image, his face draining of color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Then, the audio began. The voice of a 10-year-old boy, cleaned and amplified, echoed across the town square, a voice from the grave. He took her hand. Sheriff Thompson. He took her into the woods, and she never came back. Panic began to flicker in Thompson's eyes. He looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of faces that had been beaming with adoration just moments before. He saw confusion turning to dawning horror, then to revulsion and rage. He saw them holding up their phones, the screens glowing with the headline of Corbin's story. His fortress was crumbling. The walls were caving in. The second photograph flashed onto the screens. Thompson kneeling in front of Lily, his face in profile. Then the third, Thompson leading her by the hand into the forest. The governor had stopped speaking, his mouth hanging open. He stared at the screen, then at the man beside him. His expression, one of utter shock. The final element of the attack was the most devastating. The audio of the boy's voice faded, and a new sound filled the air. A woman's voice, clear and strong. It was Maya. Corbin's team had recorded her reading from Samuel's diary. The judge, the businessman, the deputy. They were his accomplices. A hunting club, he called it. Lily wasn't the first. She was just the one they couldn't bury deep enough. The names were read out, one by one. The judge, now retired, was in the front row of the crowd. His face went ashen. The businessman's son, who now ran the family company, looked around in wild-eyed panic. It was over. 31 years of lies, dismantled in 90 seconds of perfectly executed media warfare. Thompson stood up, his movements stiff, robotic. He looked for an escape, but there was none. The adoring crowd had become a jury, their faces a gallery of condemnation. He was surrounded. Then, through the stunned silence, came a new sound. The slow, deliberate footsteps of 2 uniformed state police officers walking onto the stage. They hadn't served under him. They owed him nothing. One of them held up a pair of handcuffs. "Thomas Thompson," the officer said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Lily Anderson." The click of the handcuffs, snapping shut around Thompson's wrists, was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a lock breaking, of a tomb being sealed, of a 31-year-old debt being paid. The flash of a press camera went off, capturing the moment for eternity. The celebrated hero, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, his hands cuffed behind his back, his legacy incinerated in a blaze of public justice. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a raw, ragged cry of grief and rage. The cinematic payoff was complete. The monster had been dragged from his pedestal and into the light. The aftermath was not a clean slate, but a landscape of wreckage. The trial of Thomas Thompson and his co-conspirators was a media circus, a gruesome spectacle that laid bare the rot at the heart of Harmony Creek. More victims were identified, their cold cases reopened, their families given the bitter, belated gift of answers. The town was forced to look at itself in the mirror and see not a quaint, idyllic community, but a place where evil had been allowed to flourish. Watered by their own willful blindness, the name Thompson, once a source of pride, was now a synonym for monstrous betrayal. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, where he would die of a heart attack less than a year later, alone in his cell. For Lily's parents, the truth was a cruel kind of salvation. David and Sarah, now frail and elderly, attended every day of the trial. They sat in the front row, holding hands, their faces etched with a grief so profound it seemed to have reshaped their very bones. They listened to the horrific details of their daughter's last moments, a pain no parent should ever have to bear. But they listened. They needed to. After the verdict, Lily's body, or what was left of it, was returned to them. The small bones, the tattered remnants of her blue sweater. They buried her in the town cemetery, under a simple granite headstone that read, Lily Little Sparrow Anderson, finally home. The funeral was a quiet affair. The whole town wanted to come, to assuage their own guilt with a public display of mourning, but David and Sarah refused. The only people they invited were Liam and Maya. They stood by the small grave, the autumn wind rustling the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded the plot. Sarah held Maya's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thin as a bird's wing. "You gave us back our daughter." David looked at Liam, his eyes, no longer hollow, now filled with a deep, bottomless sorrow. 31 years, he said, his voice thick. "We spent 31 years looking for a monster in the shadows. We never thought to look at the man holding the flashlight. There was no healing, not really. The wound was too deep, the scar too wide. But there was a kind of peace. The end of not knowing. The end of a question that had haunted every waking moment of their lives." A few weeks later, Liam and Maya drove to a small, overgrown cemetery on the other side of the county. It took them an hour to find the grave. There was no headstone, just a small, numbered metal marker nearly swallowed by weeds. Samuel Black, 1973 to 2024. They had learned from the coroner's report that he had died of pancreatic cancer, alone in the small remote cabin that had been his sanctuary and his prison. He had died just days before they found the chest. He never got to see his life's work come to fruition. Liam knelt and cleared the weeds from the marker. Maya took something from her pocket. It was the small, hand-carved wooden bird from the chest. The one Lily had made, its wings outstretched, ready for flight. She placed it gently on the ground, next to the cold metal of the marker, a gift from one lost soul to another. "He saw," Liam said quietly, repeating the words from the cassette tape. "He saw, and he never looked away." They stood there for a long time as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forgotten graves. They had started this journey looking for a thrill, an adventure. They had found a story of unimaginable darkness, but also one of incredible, heartbreaking courage. The courage of a 6-year-old girl who loved to carve birds. The courage of a 10-year-old boy who saw something terrible and spent the rest of his life making sure the world would see it to. Later that night, back in their apartment, the empty chest sat in the corner of the room. It was just an old wooden box now, its secrets given up, its purpose fulfilled. But it didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, saturated with the echoes of the lives it had touched. The life of a little girl, stolen too soon. The life of a boy who sacrificed his own peace for the truth. The lives of parents trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty. The life of a monster who wore a hero's mask. Maya ran her hand over the rough wood. Do you think he knew? She asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. Samuel, do you think he knew someone would find it? I think he hoped, Liam replied, looking at the chest. That's all he had left. It was a haunting thought, a lifetime of pain and obsession, distilled into a single, desperate act of hope. A message in a bottle, thrown into the ocean of time, waiting for someone to find it. They had been the ones to find it. And now, they were the ones who had to carry its weight. The ones who knew the true cost of a secret that refused to be buried. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with the faint rustling sound of a sparrow's wings, finally taking flight.